So in moving the motion on behalf of the Anti-Austerity Alliance and Socialist Party TDs tonight, we're offering the government a chance to withdraw the water charges which are hated and reviled throughout the length and breadth of this country, and also offering them a chance to disband Irish Water, the bottomless pit which has eaten up 539 million on water meters, 85 million on consultants and millions more on other expenditure. To retreat in an organised fashion from this debacle, to pull back your troops, if you like, in a disciplined way from a battle that you're clearly losing. Now, the government has made many mistakes, but one of them of late is believing its own propaganda, that people had accepted the discount water charges introduced in a panic last November, and that somehow the protest movement had ebbed and retreated to a small group. Since when has tens of thousands of people filling up O'Connell Street during a Triple Crown victory been a protest movement in retreat or dwindling? Now, the Minister, Alan Kelly, yesterday claimed that people were now coming on board, they were jumping on the water charges train. If people are jumping on board, why did the Minister feel it necessary to go and push them today by issuing threats of deduction at source of the water charges, a threat that he knows is idle? The water charges have become a lightning conductor for the suffering of 6 years of austerity of ordinary people in this country. Now, of course, in many ways they're no worse than other austerity measures that preceded them, such as the universal social charge, the property tax, the housing and mortgage debt that's been left hanging around people's necks. But there's one major difference with the water charges, and that is that people have control over it and that we can win on this issue. People have the power to withhold payment and to engage in a mass campaign of civil disobedience without needing the permission of anyone, like a trade union leader or anybody else. Now, Alan Kelly the Minister spoke about fairness, that everyone must pay and make a contribution. The water charges is a highly regressive measure. A millionaire pays the same as a minimum wage worker. How could that be considered in any way progressive? For example, in the budget in 2015, the government saw fit to give a tax cut to the top 17% of earners of 405 million and to levy a water charge of 290 million on the rest of us. So tax cuts for the wealthy and water charges for the poorest. But the water charges can never be fair or democratic. The Minister is out bullying and threatening today when he said something quite different 4 years ago, when he opposed water charges and got elected on that basis. Now, people have marched, people have been demonised by this government, people have been arrested and jailed. Now people have to use the best and only way that we have to win and get the water charges abolished, and that is a mass collective refusal to pay the bills in 1 week's time. That's essential to defeat the water charges, to make Irish Water financially unviable, to deprive it of revenue, and to make it politically impossible for this or a future government to maintain the water charges. Just imagine when a general election is at its peak, is most likely to take place in a year's time, non-payment of the water charges could be at its peak. You could have a situation where 4 or 5 doors out of every 10 that are canvassed by the government parties will be not paying the water charges, with many others also opposing it. And after 1 year of non-payment, by the time a general election is called, a new government will have to abolish the water charges if that's achieved. And let's be clear, if people pay, no matter what the promises of parties that are saying that they'll abolish the water charges, if a new government comes in and people are paying the water charges, they will maintain the water charges. They will come under the same pressure from the Troika that your government has come under and had their arms twisted for the last 6 years, with arguments that we've spent a lot of money, etc., etc. But it's mass non-payment of the bills that will render any of these threats absolutely useless and powerless. And this, let's be clear, is the situation. There are no penalties for 1 year and 3 months of non-payment of the water charges. Nothing can happen till after a full year of non-payment. by which time there will be a general election. Now, at the 11th hour today, the Minister and some in the compliant media, owned by billionaires, some of whom have a vested interest in pursuing the water charges agenda, have put out a spin that new legislation is being brought in to deduct the water charges at source. The water charge is a utility, not a tax. If the government wants to deduct utility bills from people's earnings, it will have to bring in legislation through this House, a major piece of legislation. And even if it does that, it still has to bring people to court and persuade a judge to impose an attachment order on the wages or welfare of that person. Now, how can this government or any government bring 500,000 or even 1 million non-payers through the courts? It's simply impossible. That's why mass non-payment is absolutely key to abolishing the charges. And of course, if the Minister does dare to tinker around with this legislation for a third time and to introduce such a law, other utilities might as well get in the queue then. The ESB, the TV licence and on board GOSH, because a precedent will have been set by this government to deduct any bill that people can't afford from their earnings. And if you contrast the threat, which we saw in independent newspapers today, to have fast-tracked court hearings to deal with this issue, it certainly contrasts with the hands-off attitude that this government has taken to the bankers, to the developers, to the rich and wealthy who brought this country to ruin. There was no fast-track courts or any courts at all for them. And it's quite obscene as well that the big brother actions being taken by this government, such as turning landlords and councils into debt collectors for Irish Water. I received 2 letters today from council tenants. One is 80 years old. He's been a tenant. He's now a tenant of TUA, a housing agency, which many people are. He received a letter telling him his details must be handed over by the housing agency, and that if he didn't pay his bill, he wasn't in fulfilment of his tenancy. In other words, threatening an elderly man with eviction. It's absolutely outrageous carry-on for this government. I also was sent this letter by somebody who received it from Clwyd, who are legally bound now to pass the details over of their tenants. Scaring people is quite unbelievable. The very people that the Labour Party in particular promised to protect. And in finishing up, I've 1 or 2 words to say for the Labour Party. Their treachery to working class people knows absolutely no bounds, and neither does, I'd have to say, their political stupidity in taking on the most savage roles in this government: water, housing crisis, and of course the Ministry of Social Destruction. And today's threats are the obituary in reality for the Labour Party, because people are reacting with outrage at the contrast in treatment of ordinary people to the well-heeled in society. And the Labour Party deserves everything that's coming its way, because the Minister has threatened the poorest people today. But 4 years ago, this is what the Labour Party said. They were going to protect people from Fine Gael cuts and from
the displays in the House are not in order.
And from a €238 water charge. But actually, what they've done is they've brought in a €260 water charge, which is actually higher than what they said the Fine Gael was standing over. And you've given people that, and you've broken every single other promise that you said that you would make. And really, this is, if the Labour Party doesn't take this opportunity in particular to withdraw the water charges tomorrow night to vote with our motion, that's been given them an opportunity to save themselves from political extinction, and I'd strongly advise them and Fine Gael to avail of this opportunity.
Thank you, Deputy. And now Common Deputy Paul Murphy.
Thank you very much, Cathaoirleach. Government spokespeople haven't failed over recent months, presented with a camera or a microphone, to express their full confidence that people will accept the water charges, that people will pay the water charges, that the protest movement is a diminishing minority. Very, very confident all the time in words. But actions speak a lot louder than words, and their actions over the past months, over the past 24 hours, demonstrates that they're not confident at all. You look at the incredible state repression that has been meted out to anti-water charges protesters. You look at the jailing of 4 people for 2.5 weeks simply because they protested peacefully within 20 metres of water meter installation. You look at the dawn raids, 6, 8, 10 Gardaí, including at teenagers' homes, of over 30 people in Tallaght, again for participation in a peaceful protest, at this time relating to the Taoiseach. You look at the use of private contractors, private security, hired by GMC Sierra, who are now incidentally looking for Irish Water and inevitably the taxpayer to pay for them, bullying and intimidating peaceful protesters. You look at the huge numbers of Gardaí sent into working class communities to ensure that water meters are installed against the wishes of the majority. They're not the actions at all of a government that is confident that water charges will be accepted. Or, separate from the state repression, you look at the delay of the deadline. Incredible. On the morning of the deadline, a Labour Party spokesperson announcing that this was no longer a drop-dead deadline, and now the deadline for registration has been extended to the end of this year. We're on our 4th deadline at this stage, such is the enthusiasm for getting on the train of Irish Water. You look at the delay of the Eurostat test, which should have been taking place around now, but is now delayed until the earliest in the summer. You look at the incredible bluff, bluster, bullying from Minister Kelly in the last 24 hours. They're all the actions of a government that is scared. In particular, they're scared of the massive non-payment that will sink their water charges, that will sink Irish Water. They're scared that it will also sink the government and its entire austerity agenda. They're scared of knocking on doors in elections where a very significant number of people have already refused to pay. And they're also scared of the political potential for this movement. Minister Howlin this morning said that some of those involved in the anti-water charges movement were just interested in bringing down the government. No, Minister, we're not just interested in bringing down the government. We're also interested in smashing the entire austerity agenda, in showing there's an alternative to austerity, and in bringing down water charges. But we are also, and we make no bones about it, interested in bringing down this government. This government which has implemented such savage austerity, which has betrayed election promises, but not just the government. It's a system of austerity and neoliberal capitalism that operates in the interests of the 1%, where Irish Water is a microcosm, with the role of Dennis O'Brien at the heart of a nexus of politics, of money, of media.
Deputy, just remind you, persons outside the House should not be mentioned in the House. Out of order.
It's a microcosm of the way our society.
It's not a microcosm.
It is a microcosm.
It is a microcosm. I'm sorry, Deputy. For the benefit of the Deputy still to speak. For the benefit. I'm sorry, Deputy. I'm sorry, Deputy. I'm not wrong. I'm sorry, Deputy. Deputy. I just want to remind you. If you want to erode the time, that's good enough. But the member in possession shall keep to order.
Of a system whereby things operate for the 1% against the interests of the 99%, where power is concentrated economically, media, politically, in extremely small numbers of hands. And out of the movement against water charges is the potential to utterly change politics in Ireland. It already has changed politics significantly, but there's the potential to build the biggest, most significant radical left challenge that has ever been mounted. And the movement must have a political reflection, particularly in the context of all of the bullying and threat about court cases. And so we are calling, including in this motion, for non-payment campaigns across the country to discuss standing candidates, to stand against the parties of austerity on a platform of non-payment, against the water charges, against austerity, on a message of principled opposition to austerity, ruling out coalition with any of the establishment parties, and for using the platform of the Dáil to mobilise working class people power from below to bring an end to the logic of austerity and of capitalism. That challenge can involve existing left groups, existing left independents, but also new, most importantly, new, fresh forces who haven't previously been involved in politics, who maybe don't consider themselves right now as being involved in politics, but could stand and could take seats from the austerity parties in this election, whereby we could have a stance in almost every constituency in the country where perhaps over 20 TDs could be elected as a real reference point. The other issue that they're scared of is the Eurostat test. I have the latest manual somewhere here of how the Eurostat test will operate, and it's quite clear. It says determine whether a producer is market, it must sell its product at an economically significant price, which in practice would be assessed if the sales of the producer cover a majority of the production costs, i.e. over 50%. It also states that the 50% test should be applied by looking over a range of years, and only if the test holds for several years should it be applied strictly. In other words, the test will have to be redone whenever non-payment has kicked in. Any objective look at it, I think, will indicate that if there's any significant level of non-payment, the government's in trouble on the Eurostat test. And then the whole model of off-balance sheet financing is in crisis, and the government itself is facing a political crisis. And I think this does get to the heart of what this is all about. And it's a little bit strange that we're a week out from bills coming out and you have to discuss, well, what's the real agenda here? But actually, I think you have to do it because the bills, the numbers involved in Irish Water, they don't add up in terms of it raising any revenue for the state or for Irish Water. It was highlighted in the debate in December, where it's indisputable, taking into account the water conservation grant, even if everybody paid and got the grant, they'd raise 90 million euros. And that doesn't take into account the cost of getting that money, which will be greater than 90 million euros. So the government is introducing a charge that will lose money rather than raise money. So the water charges don't add up as a revenue-raising exercise. They're a revenue-losing exercise. So why is it happening? What's the agenda behind it? Why is the Labour Party willing to face complete annihilation over this issue? One, because it's part of shifting taxation in the longer term away from taxing on profits, taxing on wealth, taxing on high income, towards regressive taxation on working class people. Two, because this is about privatization. It's a long-term strategic goal of Irish Water. Where did Irish water charges come from in this iteration? They came from the Memorandum of Understanding signed by Fianna Fáil and the Greens in 2010. In other words, they came from the Troika. The same Troika included in the deals, the memoranda with Portugal and with Greece, the privatisation of their respective water companies. So that's a clear agenda coming from the European establishment. In Ireland, you didn't have any charges, water was not commodified, therefore a vital precondition before privatisation was introducing those charges. And so it is the dark forces that the former minister referred to are the major water corporations, some of the biggest companies in the world, the likes of Veolia, absolutely profit-hungry and ruthless in pursuing those profits. But privatisation is not just a future threat. It's happening right now. It's happening from below, with design, build and operate contracts giving to the same companies, including Veolia, which operate large parts of the water infrastructure on a for-profit basis. But it's also happening from above, with the whole method, this off-balance sheet funding of Irish Water. People should ask the question, when the government goes on and on about it, why are they doing it? It's not because there's any money for free, because it's off-balance sheet, which sometimes, the way the government talks about it, that's the impression you would have, because any money borrowed by Irish Water will have to be paid for by us through water charges. It's not because bringing it onto the balance sheet would mean Ireland will be over the deficit requirements of the EU, because it wouldn't. It's not because it'll bring in any more money for investment, because it won't. The money could be invested straight from government or through government borrowing at a lower rate than Irish Water will be able to borrow. So why is it? What's happening is a privatisation of the income stream of Irish Water. That's exactly what happened in Detroit Water, where it was owned by the city, but the funding was through the bond markets. The bond owners are interested in only one thing, which is their return, which is why they were able to apply massive pressure to demand that water was cut off because they didn't pay in time. So the government's plan is off-balance sheet financing to sell off the bonds, to sell off the income stream on the international financial markets. The government suggests that those who are not for water charges are for dilapidated water infrastructure. It's not the case. It's not our fault in the Anti-Austerity Alliance that you have a crisis in water infrastructure. It's the government's fault, which hasn't invested, and it's previous government's fault. You don't need water charges to have investment, and if you do have water charges, there's no guarantee that you do have investment. There's a choice here. It's a choice between regressive taxation and privatisation of an income stream, a charge that will take 2% of the disposable income of the bottom 10% of income earners and less than 0.2% of the top 10%.
Thank you.
Or the choice is central progressive taxation, that those who have more pay more, through corporation tax, through financial transaction tax, through higher tax on the highest earners.
Thank you. I'm sorry I have to call your colleague, Deputy Fionney McGrath.